Not much is talked about regarding disabilities in football. Everyone knows about the permanent scars on Tevez and Ribéry, and even Nedved's famous triplated patella. But those aren't really disabilities. Perhaps Lionel Messi struggles with hormone treatment is the closest we've got to something like that in the modern era. But nearly a century ago, we had one player who defied all odds and despite cognitive and physical disability, managed to become one of the greatest and most feared forwards of all time. So great, he frequently managed to outshine the king himself, Pelé. Welcome to the life of Garrincha, the bow-legged angel. Few players have had their career defined by a single moment so early on in their lives as Garrincha. The moment he was born, the doctors realized he was special, but not in the way we now remember. His spine was malformed, one of his legs was 6 centimeters shorter than the other, and both were bowed, curved outwards or wherever you wanna call it, but back then, the doctors deemed him disabled. Right then and there, as he gasped out for his first few breaths of fresh air, the world had decided that Garrincha was unfit for any kind of physical ability, let alone to become a football player. If that had already been alarming, then began the testing, and I'm sure it broke his parents' hearts to hear that Garrincha might have never been able to learn how to walk. Thankfully, Garrincha had a way of romanticizing what came his way. Even his origins were made into somewhat of a myth. In his memorial, the never-ending question of what planet he came from was finally answered. They said Garrincha was born on a small planet, the planet of Pau Grande. For Garrincha, it took him one big opportunity to convince him that football really was the way to go. Over his early years, it is said he played for multiple clubs. Some sources say that at first he started playing for his factory's football team, then going to his local club for a few years and then having cameos at 2 other small teams. But his talent was so immense that over the years he had built a reputation locally, and luckily, once a Botafogo scout visited his hometown, he would be immediately picked. One way or another, things escalated so rapidly that he would be given a trial training with the first team, and just 15 minutes in, Garrincha nutmegged Nilton dos Santos, a Brazilian international at the time. The wingback was so impressed that he convinced the club to sign him. It really took one of the fastest climbs to fame in football history to convince Garrincha that the sport was worth pursuing. On his debut, of course, he scored a hat-trick. Garrincha was playing as if he was still in the streets. This was seen by many as youthful exuberance and innocence, but over the years, it would be argued that Garrincha was, besides his other disabilities, also mentally disabled. Upon his arrival at Botafogo, teammates would have a hard time talking to him, often claiming he was socially inept and was mentally underdeveloped. This would later be proven in an IQ test where Garrincha would score in the low 70s, low enough to be legally deemed as intellectually disabled. All these arguments have combined for an interesting conclusion that in many ways been the reason it took him so long to decide to pursue it. After an impressive first year with Botafogo, where Garrincha scored 20 goals in 26 matches, he would move positions and begin playing deeper and being more involved in playmaking, and though he kept on impressing, his lack of experience still kept him out of the 1954 World Cup. Looking at Garrincha's career, it seems as if every moment was just leading up to the next World Cup. He never shined so bright as when he put on the famous yellow kit. These next 4 years all culminated in 1957 when Garrincha led Botafogo to win the regional championship, earning the trust necessary to become a key player for the national team. The following year, one specific moment would make sure the whole world feared the man who was now known in Brazil as the Anjo de Perna Torta, the bow-legged angel. The national team would fly to Italy to take part in 2 matches against Inter and Fiorentina, and well, I'll translate the description of the match against Fiorentina from a Brazilian book. Brazil was leading 3-0, but it was Garrincha who made sure Fiorentina would bleed to death. As he ran down the pitch, he made of the Italians little paper soldiers, one falling after the other, even the goalkeeper. As Garrincha found himself with a chance to shoot at an open net, he pulled the ball back and dribbled the centre-back once more. Then, Garrincha simply walked into the goal with the ball at his feet, picked it up and walked back to his own half. The stage was set for the 1958 World Cup. As the lineups of the third match were announced, two names made their first appearance in the competition: Garrincha and Pelé. They would be facing the mighty Soviet Union with the Black Spider himself, Lev Yashin, on goal. The media was in uproar. They said Pelé was far too young and Garrincha was simply too stupid to be playing. Ironically, the first 3 minutes of the match could not have made the media look any more stupid. Now referred to by many as the 3 most beautiful minutes football has ever witnessed. It would all start with Garrincha destroying the defense. After 38 seconds, his feints had dropped the same center back to the ground a total of 3 times, and the stadium burst out in laughter, soon quieted as Garrincha hit the post. In the next play, Garrincha nearly assists Pelé, who smacks the ball onto the bar. The drama is incredible. The crowd cannot believe what they're seeing after less than 90 seconds of football. The other 90 would follow the same route before Vavá got the ball and put Brazil in front. It was now clear that Pelé and Garrincha were must-haves in the lineup, and both would feature in every single game from there on. After their win over Wales in the quarterfinals, their wing-back would compliment Garrincha in every imaginable way, saying he was capable of real magic, and that, though both were amazing, he felt Garrincha was far more dangerous and unpredictable than the young Pelé. The semi-final was a statement 5-2 win over France, where Pelé scored a hat-trick, and then came Sweden in the final. As Brazil fell behind, it would be an incredible run and cross from Garrincha that allowed Vavá to tie the match. And if that wasn't enough, the same play would be replicated to make the match 2-1. In the end, the result would be 5-2 once again, and Brazil would be world champions, one trophy that meant more than usual, as they were yet to recover from the famous Maracanazo. One notable thing would be that Garrincha would barely celebrate once the match was over. It was later found out that he didn't really understand the tournament and thought a second leg was to be played before they were crowned champions. It's hard not to feel bad for the guy, but I'm guessing that he wouldn't have wanted us to. Regardless, this achievement really derailed his life. He struggled to deal with the fame, and over the next years he would seem completely lost. His alcoholism would get to a whole new level. He would gain a lot of weight and begin acting reckless. 2 moments would stand out. First, he would be driving recklessly in his hometown and would end up running over his father, who thankfully was fine and stopped a mob of people from chasing Garrincha. Then he went on tour to Sweden and somehow managed to get a woman pregnant there. The man was truly spiraling out of control, but thankfully, then he met Elza Soares, a famous Brazilian singer. The two, to the distaste of the rest of Brazil, fell in love. Garrincha abandoned his family and began his life with her. The tabloids tarnished her reputation, but she had the ambition Garrincha lacked, and that would be vital for his career. Soon he would be back in shape, and Botafogo would highly benefit from it, winning the regional Carioca Championship 2 years in a row, with Garrincha being heavily influential over the second title, scoring 2 goals in the final. That year also marked Garrincha's second World Cup, and it was a drama of epic proportions. The crowned champions would go in and have an unconvincing win over Mexico. There were some signs of worry, but nothing would have prepared them for what happened next. As they got into their match against Czechoslovakia, Pelé would take a shot on goal and collapse on the ground. It was clear he was in trouble. But back then, remember, there were no substitutions, so he forced himself to play through it, a sacrifice that would put him out of the tournament for good. Made even worse as Brazil failed to win the match regardless. Their hopes were at an all-time low. After all, they now relied on a player who had become a nationwide pariah for being a deadbeat father, a cheater, and a drunk. The following match would see them go to the 88th minute, tied against Spain, but then Garrincha got the ball and made the opposition look silly before supplying Amarildo with an inch-perfect cross that would give them the win. This moment must have fueled his inner desire for chaos, because in the quarter-final match against England, he was wild, untamed, hungry, so much so he would even score the first goal through a header, something he barely ever did. Then, one of his powerful free kicks would deflect off the keeper's gloves and Vavá would score with an open goal. To finish the match, he would score the third goal of the day from outside the box. England had been demolished, and Garrincha was the one to blame. The semi-final match was the craziest of the bunch. Garrincha was still in the same mindset of the previous match, but this time around he was being heavily marked by a Chilean defender who still couldn't stop him from scoring 2 and then assisting the third. But the match-defining moment would come as Garrincha put his knee to the defender's back as retaliation. The referee, afraid to face the anger of the host nation, decided to send off Garrincha even though he had not seen the foul. To make matters worse, as he walked off, he would be hit in the head by a rock thrown from the stands. Brazil were on to the final, but at what cost if neither Garrincha nor Pelé would be able to play? The federation couldn't allow this to happen, so they pulled every string available and got the referee to admit to his mistake. It would go down to a vote and Garrincha would be allowed to play the final. The moments before the match were intense. Brazil hid lots of information from the Czechs. They left out the fact that Garrincha had fallen ill before the match and would play with the help of some medicine, and created a rumor that Pelé would be available in the final. Still, Brazil would cruise to a 3-1 win, and Garrincha would not only be the top scorer of the tournament, but also its best player. In the absence of the great Pelé, Garrincha proved he could make the difference all by himself. Once he was back, his new wife would convince him to bargain for a new contract, which in an age in which players would sign blank contracts to prove their love for the club, was seen as a great betrayal. The public perception of the club got even worse, and soon Garrincha would leave Botafogo. By then, Garrincha had to deal with an ongoing knee injury that had gotten much worse as he refused to see a specialist, only being taken care of by local healers in his hometown. A poor decision that ruined the later stages of his career. There would be a move to Corinthians preceding his last World Cup in 1966, but nothing relevant would come off of it. The World Cup, on the other hand, would see him reunited with Pelé, and as Brazil won the first match with a goal by each, there were great hopes, but unfortunately, in the second match the two would experience their first and only ever loss while playing together for the national team. A stat that is absolutely unbelievable considering they played 40 matches together. Garrincha would miss the third match and Pelé would once again be fouled and forced to play the rest of the match injured, as Brazil would lose to Portugal and be out of the World Cup in the group stage. For the rest of his career, Garrincha, who had already been struggling to play more than 15 matches a season for 4 years, would now barely ever play. By the time he would retire at 40 years of age, he was already a grandfather. He had stints with Flamengo in Colombia, with some other small clubs and even some exhibition matches, but above all, those years would be more notable for him hitting rock bottom, attempting suicide on 2 different occasions, being saved by his wife both times. In 1968, he would even train with Benfica in Portugal alongside Eusébio, but the club would decide against signing him. He was clearly far past his best, the player who once had every club trying to sign him, and even Juventus, AC Milan and Inter trying to pull off a collective deal in which he would get to play for all 3 clubs, was now completely done and dusted. Post-retirement, Garrincha would continue in trouble. He would be accused of domestic violence as his wife left him, and his friends would have to step in multiple times to help him as he kept going down a dark path. Unfortunately, nothing they did was ever enough, and the last years of his life would be obscure. As he headed towards the end of his days as a 49-year-old, he would be hospitalized 8 times in the same year before entering an alcoholic coma and finally passing away. The day of his funeral, hundreds of thousands showed up at the Maracanã Stadium to get a look at his coffin. As his burial began, it seemed Garrincha had saved one last act of defiance, as his coffin would be too large and not able to fit his grave at first. Once it was done, his tombstone read, "Here rests in peace the one who once was known as the joy of the people." Garrincha brought euphoria to many at the same time as he would live out a bleak, seemingly hopeless life behind closed doors. He seemed unable to escape his roots, a heartbreaking thing to realize for a man who over his life had to overcome so much. Now the only thing left to do is remember him for who he was at his best, the man who performed some of the most incredibly entertaining dribbles and runs football has seen, who challenged what was deemed possible for a person born with disability, and the man who carried Brazil on his back to a World Cup title in a moment of desperation. This was Garrincha's career in a video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.